What happens when one of the world's most respected journalists sits down with one of its most controversial royals? What began as a polite conversation soon unraveled into a confrontation no one saw coming. When Prince Harry appeared on the Diana Sawyer special, it was supposed to be an intimate, thoughtful exchange. Instead, by the end, there were no smiles, no handshakes, only a silence sharp enough to cut through glass. The set was cozy, deliberately so. No studio audience, no harsh spotlights, just a softly lit sitting room, beige and warm, two armchairs facing each other with a pot of tea steaming quietly between them. A space built to look safe, to feel safe, a place where truth might finally exhale. "Harry," Diane began, her tone gentle but assured, "it's been quite a journey for you. Life in California, away from royal duties, raising your children. How are you adjusting?" Harry leaned back, one leg crossed, a polite smile hovering without ever reaching his eyes. "I'm doing fine, Diane. Better than most people would, I suppose. I don't have to answer to anyone anymore." The producers behind the cameras exchanged quick glances. The temperature had already shifted. "That sense of independence must be refreshing," Diane said evenly. "But do you ever miss the structure of royal life? The sense of duty?" Harry's smile faded. "Structure?" he echoed. "You mean the cage? The structure you're talking about is just a polite word for control. People romanticize it because they've never lived it." Diane nodded, maintaining composure. "Some might say it also gave you purpose, serving your country, continuing your mother's legacy." Harry's jaw tightened. "My mother's legacy has nothing to do with royal tradition. If anything, that system destroyed her." The air went still. Even Diane's seasoned calm faltered for a heartbeat before she steadied herself. "I understand that's painful," she said softly. "She meant a great deal to all of us." Harry gave a cold, brief laugh. "To you, maybe. But you didn't live with the cameras outside your window. You didn't watch what that pressure did to her." Diane's eyes softened. "You're right. I didn't. But as someone who admired her—" "Admired her?" Harry cut in. "The media didn't admire her, Diane. They fed on her." The words hit like a strike. It wasn't an outburst. It was a verdict. Diane took a breath, reminding herself she was here to listen, not spar. "I can see how deeply that still affects you," she said quietly. "Do you ever feel that same scrutiny has shaped the way you raise your own family, with Meghan and the children?" Harry's gaze hardened. "I don't see how that's relevant." "It's relevant," Diane continued carefully, "because you've spoken publicly about wanting to protect them from the same pressures. I think people are curious." "People," Harry snapped, "should stop being curious about things that don't concern them." The words landed like a slap. Even he seemed to realize how sharp they'd come out. The room tensed. A camera light flickered. "I'm sorry if that question felt intrusive," Diane said, her smile still professional but thinning. "It's just, your life bridges both worlds, privacy and public scrutiny." "Privacy," Harry said coolly, "means not talking about it on national television, doesn't it?" The silence that followed was heavy. Diane had weathered countless difficult interviews, but this was different. His defensiveness wasn't just irritation, it was armor. "I sense some frustration, Harry," she said quietly. "Is it with me, or with what this conversation represents?" Harry gave a small, humorless smirk. "Maybe both." A nervous laugh rippled through the crew. Diane didn't flinch. Her eyes sharpened, her tone turning deliberate. "Well," she said softly, "I hope we can still find honesty in this space." Harry's response came fast. "Honesty? The media and honesty aren't exactly best friends, are they?" That one landed. Hard. Not just with Diane, but with everyone listening. The warmth that had welcomed Harry to the set was gone. The polite tone had dissolved into something colder, heavier. Each question now felt like a step closer to open conflict. Diane glanced at her notes, then set them aside. This wasn't the interview she'd prepared for. She inhaled deeply. "Let's see where this goes," she murmured to herself. The camera zoomed in. The calm was over. The storm had begun. The living room set felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. The tea between them sat untouched, its last curls of steam dissolving into the cool studio air. Diana Sawyer softened her voice the way she did when she sensed a guest bracing for impact. "Let me ask this carefully," she began. "You and Meghan have spoken about building a life on your own terms. How are the two of you really, beyond the headlines, beyond the noise?" Harry's mouth twitched into a smile that wasn't quite friendly. "We're fine. Better than fine. We don't measure our marriage by tabloid applause. It's not a performance." Diane nodded gently. "I understand the fatigue with headlines, but you've also invited the public into your story, through your book, your series, your speeches. Is it fair to say they're invested because you asked them to be?" "The public is invested because the public loves a spectacle," Harry replied, leaning back. "We tell our story on our terms. That's not the same as handing over the keys to our home and letting strangers rummage through the drawers." Diane let the remark breathe before continuing. "And your children? How do you protect them while living in the public eye?" "We protect them by not turning them into content," Harry snapped, too quickly. His tone cooled, but the sting lingered. "Curiosity isn't citizenship, right?" Diane absorbed the jab with a measured nod. "That's fair," she said. "I ask because parents watching might wonder how you draw the line. What does private look like for you?" "Private looks like not answering questions disguised as concern," he said. "It looks like remembering that being visible doesn't mean you owe anyone access." She resisted the small flinch that wanted to show. "All right," Diane said softly. "Let's widen the lens. The monarchy. When you look back, do you see an institution capable of change, or one structurally resistant to modern life?" Harry's laugh was low and humorless. "Institutions don't change. They molt. They shed just enough skin to look new, but the bones stay the same." "But surely," Diane offered, "you benefited from that structure. Access, visibility, a platform." Harry cut in. "People confuse scaffolding with the building. I did the work of becoming a person. The institution was just the scaffolding I tore down so I could see the sky." The phrasing was sharp, almost rehearsed. Diane let it hang, then pressed gently. "Some would argue that without that scaffolding, the world might never have listened when you spoke." He tilted his head slightly. "Some people confuse gravity with generosity. The world listened because I said what others wouldn't." Diane folded her hands steady. "And your brother? Your father? I'm not asking for private details. I'm asking about hope. Is there any?" Harry's eyes hardened. "Hope is what people reach for when they're afraid of silence. Silence can be a boundary, too." Diane acknowledged it with a quiet nod. "You've spoken often about your mother," she continued, her tone softening. "Her compassion, her humanity, her effort to bring warmth to a role that often resists it. Do you feel you honor her best by being outspoken, or by seeking a quieter path?" For the first time, something unguarded flickered across his face, gone almost before it arrived. His jaw tightened. "My mother isn't a rhetorical device for interviews," he said, controlled but cutting. "She's not a lantern you can wave to light your questions." Diane absorbed the rebuke without defensiveness. "I ask," she said quietly, "because so many people, myself included, felt a connection to her. Her loss was collective. I wonder if you carry that shared grief alongside your own." Harry's answer came without hesitation. "You can keep the collective part. I'm done paying interest on grief other people borrowed." The words landed like a coin dropped on glass. Sharp, cold, final. Behind the cameras, a chair creaked, then stilled. Diane breathed once, twice, before speaking again. "Let me try from another angle," she said. "You've said you left to protect your sanity and your family, and yet please hear the sincerity in this. Your projects often draw you back into the very storm you escaped. Why not disengage completely?" "Because disengagement is how institutions win," Harry replied. "They expect silence. I replace their narrative with mine." "Is there a point," Diane asked softly, "where reclaiming the narrative becomes reliving the wound?" Harry's smile returned, thin and blade-like. "Is there a point," he countered, "where interviewing becomes moral theater? Where we pretend questions are neutral just because they're framed gently?" Diane didn't bristle. She only met his gaze. calm and unflinching, as the air between them grew impossibly still. She regarded him the way a surgeon studies an incision, calm, precise, knowing it might hurt. "It's not theater," Diane said quietly. "It's record. Records get edited," Harry replied. "That's why I keep my own." She let the edge pass. "The Netflix conversation," she continued. "There have been reports, likely exaggerated, that negotiations for a new season stalled over money. Would you like to correct the record?" Harry gave a dry laugh. "Correct the record? So, someone else can headline the correction number? My finances aren't a parlor game. People who want a scoreboard should watch sports." "Some might say transparency helps," Diane offered. "Some might say curiosity needs hobbies," he snapped. Diane's patience, honed over decades, thinned just slightly, showing only in the faint tightening around her eyes. "Harry," she said evenly, "I respect boundaries. But there's a difference between a boundary and a barricade. If you treat every question as an attack, you deny yourself the chance to be understood." He met her gaze without blinking. "Understanding is overrated." "Respect isn't," she countered gently. "And that cuts both ways." A longer silence followed. The tea had gone cold. Somewhere, an LED hummed with that barely audible whine that fills the air when tension makes a room too still. "Do you ever worry," Diane asked finally, "that the way you speak, the absolute certainty, makes it harder for people to hear you? That confidence, worn a certain way, can look like contempt?" Harry's reply came instantly. "When a man sets a boundary, it's leadership. When I do it, it's contempt. Convenient, isn't it?" "I said worn a certain way," Diane replied, unmoved. "There's a difference between clarity and condescension. Your message matters. I'm asking if you want it to land." Harry leaned forward, the faint smile gone. "What I want," he said, "is to stop answering questions that pretend to be windows when they're really mirrors." Diane absorbed the metaphor, set it down like a fragile object on the table, and chose not to pick it up again. "Then tell me this," she said quietly. "Years from now, what will people see? A man building or a man burning?" "Both," he said coolly. "Some structures deserve flames. Some foundations deserve a future." "And your family in that future?" Diane asked softly. "My family isn't a comment section," he replied. She nodded once, acknowledging the wall he'd placed there. "Then one last thing for this segment," she said, voice still warm, though the warmth was thinning. "You spoke earlier about the press feeding on your mother. You understand that? Line hurts people like me, those who tried, however imperfectly, to honor her." Harry's face hardened. "If the shoe fits," he said. There it was, the snap. A small cruelty dressed as philosophy. Diane held it in her hands, measured its weight, and set it down without anger. "All right," she said, straightening. "We'll take a short break." The director held the silence for a beat, then called, "Cut!" The soft lights didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. A producer stepped forward, then stopped and retreated. Harry stared past the cameras, remote and unreadable. Diane rested her fingertips on the armrest, composed, proud, but for the first time visibly disappointed. They would return from the break. She would try once more to coax humility out of a fortress. But something fundamental had shifted. The interview no longer felt like truth in a safe space. It felt like a matchbook flicked open in a library. And somewhere between the untouched teacups and the unasked questions, Diana Sawyer decided, finally, that enough was enough. When the cameras came back from the break, the air was different. The space between them, once comfortably conversational, now felt like a fault line waiting to split. The polite tension that had simmered before was gone, replaced by something brittle, sharp, and unspoken. Diane's voice was steady but a few degrees colder. "Welcome back," she said. "We're here with Prince Harry, continuing our discussion about life after the monarchy." Harry didn't bother with a smile this time. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, confidence radiating like heat off steel. "Yes," he said evenly. "Let's continue." Diane hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for the audience to sense she was weighing her next words. "Harry," she began softly, "I want to talk about your mother for a moment. You've often spoken of her influence, her compassion, her humanity. Do you ever feel," Diane asked gently, "that your mother might have wanted you to take a softer approach, with the press or with your family?" The shift in Harry's eyes was immediate. "My mother," he said, voice clipped, "would want me to live, Diane, to survive, not to bow and smile while people rewrite my story." Diane's tone stayed steady. "I don't doubt that," she said. "But do you think she'd want reconciliation? Healing?" Harry leaned back, scoffing. "Everyone wants to assign moral lessons to her life, don't they? You all loved her tragedy more than her truth. Don't tell me what my mother would have wanted." The words struck like a cold slap. Even the crew froze. Diane's expression barely changed. No anger, no sorrow, just the faintest trace of disbelief. "I ask," she said softly, "because many who admired her, and you, believe she'd have wanted peace between you and your family." Harry's lips tightened. "People believe a lot of things. Headlines, gossip, fairy tales. My life isn't a bedtime story for nostalgic journalists." "It's not gossip," Diane replied carefully. "To ask if you regret how public some of your disputes have become. Your book, your interviews, your documentaries—" "My truths," Harry interrupted. "And if people can't handle them, that's not my problem." Diane's patience thinned, but her composure held. "Truth can coexist with grace, Harry. Grace didn't save my mother," he shot back. The studio went silent. The low hum of the lights seemed louder now. Diane's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. She'd faced presidents, tyrants, victims, saints. She'd seen ego, grief, fury, and she recognized all three in front of her. "Let's shift a little," she said finally, regaining the rhythm. "You and Meghan have built new ventures. Some say you're redefining what it means to be royal outside the monarchy. How do you respond to critics who say you've rejected the crown but kept the privileges?" Harry's laugh was short, hollow. "Critics love to moralize other people's survival. If I build something outside their control, they call it hypocrisy. I call it freedom." "Freedom," Diane repeated slowly. "But when you speak of the monarchy with disdain while benefiting from the platform it gave you—" "Benefiting?" Harry cut in, voice rising. "You think that's a benefit? Living under a microscope from birth? That's not privilege. That's imprisonment with better furniture." "It also gave you access, education, visibility," Diane countered. "You've used those things effectively." "I earned every inch of where I stand," Harry said sharply. "I don't doubt your work ethic," Diane replied evenly. "But there's a perception—" "Perception built by people like you," he snapped. The words landed heavy. Diane didn't flinch, but the journalist in her bristled. "By me," she said quietly, the sting beneath her calm. "By the media?" Harry pressed on. "By interviewers who pretend they want honesty but just want headlines? You're all part of the same machine that devoured my mother. Now you're circling me." Diane's tone cooled, firm but composed. "Harry, I've been a journalist for decades. I've interviewed presidents, war survivors, children who've lost everything. I don't destroy people. I try to understand them." Harry smirked. "Understanding isn't empathy." "No," she said, voice steady. "But it's the first step toward it." A beat of silence. Two people, one shaped by duty, the other by rebellion, staring across an invisible gulf. "Do you ever worry," Diane asked finally, "that in running from the monarchy, you've built another one? One where you and Meghan sit on the throne deciding who gets to speak?" Harry's jaw clenched. We built a life where we don't need permission to breathe. And yet, Diane said quietly, you still seek the spotlight. That cracked something. You think I seek it? Harry's voice flared. You think I want cameras following me? People judging every breath? You have no idea what that's like. Diane met his eyes, her tone turning from inquiry to indictment. You've lived your entire life in front of the world, Harry, but visibility and victimhood aren't the same thing. The line hit him square. His composure wavered, just for a second. He looked away, then glared back. You think I enjoy this? You think this? He gestured to the cameras, the lights, her, is my choice? This world was built for me before I could walk. And yet, Diane said softly, you've learned to profit from it. The words didn't echo. They simply landed, soft, calm, and devastating. Harry froze. His lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came. Diane leaned back slightly. Let's take a breath, she murmured, half to him, half to herself. Harry straightened in his chair. You know what, Diane? His voice was low, tense. You wanted a headline. He paused, eyes locked on hers. You just got it. Diane exhaled slowly, gathering herself. Her eyes glinted, not with anger, but disbelief edged with exhaustion. I didn't want a headline, she said. I wanted honesty. I just didn't expect arrogance to get in the way. The silence that followed was thunderous, thick, electric. Neither looked away. Somewhere off camera, a producer whispered, Keep rolling. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The invisible thread of civility, the one that had barely held this interview together, snapped clean. No smiles now. The untouched teacup sat like an artifact between them, the air sharp enough to cut glass. When Diane finally spoke again, her tone had changed. No longer the smooth cadence of a seasoned journalist. It was cooler, clipped, the voice of someone who'd been pushed one time too many. Harry, she said quietly, I've sat across from world leaders, soldiers, survivors, people who've seen pain deeper than most can imagine. They spoke with humility. You, however, seem to mistake humility for weakness. Harry's eyes flashed. I'm not here to perform humility for you, Diane. I've spent my life being polite to people who didn't deserve it. I'm done with that. Diane folded her hands, knuckles whitening for the first time. Politeness isn't performance, she said evenly. It's respect, and it's running dangerously low in this room. Harry laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Respect goes both ways, doesn't it? Because all I've heard today is judgment wrapped in polite phrasing. You've mistaken accountability for judgment, Diane replied, and confidence for cruelty. You're not the victim here, Harry. Not in this room. The tension thickened, heavy and unrelenting. Behind the cameras, a producer's hand hovered over the cut signal, but no one dared move. Something irreversible was happening. Harry leaned forward, voice lower now, sharp with accusation. You know what this is, Diane? Another trap. You invite me here pretending it's about understanding. But all you want is to feed the same machine that destroyed my mother. Diane's tone softened, but her words carried steel. You keep invoking her name to justify walls no one's trying to climb, she said. You blame everyone for the fire, Harry, but you never ask if you're still holding the match. He froze. His jaw locked, eyes narrowing. How dare you bring her into this like that? You brought her in first, Diane said evenly, and you've used her memory to justify anger that doesn't honor her. I met your mother, Harry. She had grace even when the world was cruel, empathy even when she was under attack. You, on the other hand, seem to think rage is righteousness. His voice rose, cracking through the quiet. You don't get to tell me what honors my mother. Diane didn't flinch. Her calm was surgical. Then tell me, she said softly, what does? Turning every conversation into a battlefield? Belittling anyone who questions you? You say you escaped the monarchy, but you still rule every room like a throne. The words hit like a slap. Harry stood abruptly. The microphone jerked against its wire. His chair scraped hard against the studio floor. You don't know me, he said through clenched teeth. You've never known what it's like to live my life. Diane looked up at him, steady, unshaken. "No," she said quietly, "but I know arrogance when I see it. And I know pain when it's hiding behind it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the air felt suspended. Harry's chest rose and fell, every breath tight with anger. He glanced around. The cameras, the motionless crew, the woman in front of him who still refused to flinch. He forced a smile. Bitter. Hollow. "I don't need to sit here and be psychoanalyzed for ratings." "This isn't about ratings," Diane replied softly. "It's about reality. And the reality is, you've built an empire out of resentment. You don't need a monarchy to play the king." For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Her calm and resolute. Him burning with wounded pride. "This interview is over," Harry said, voice cutting like glass. He tore off his microphone. The clip snapped against his shirt, the sound echoing through the studio speakers. He turned, striding toward the door. "You can spin this however you want, Diane," he said. "I'm done explaining myself to people who'll never understand." Diane watched him go. Not triumphant, not angry, simply still. When the door closed behind him, the sound lingered like a gavel strike. Final, echoing, absolute. The cameras lingered on her. For a long, still moment, Diane didn't move, her posture steady, her expression calm, her fingertips lightly brushing the armrest. Then, with a slow breath, she turned toward the lens. "I want to apologize to our viewers," she began softly. "I've done thousands of interviews in my career, but very few where conversation itself became impossible. My goal has always been understanding, even when that understanding is uncomfortable. But understanding only works when both people are willing to find it." Her voice wavered, barely, on the last word. Yet her gaze remained firm. "I wish him peace," she added after a pause. "But peace doesn't come from shouting at ghosts." The director gave a subtle cut. The red camera light dimmed. Silence settled over the studio. Not awkward, but seismic. The kind that follows an emotional aftershock. A young production assistant whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Diane didn't respond. She only exhaled and looked at the empty chair across from her. The chair that, moments ago, held a prince. Now it held only the echo of his absence. Somewhere in the dim studio, a clock ticked softly, marking the end of something that could never be replayed. By morning, the headlines would explode. Prince Harry storms out on Diana Sawyer. Clips would flood social media, dissected frame by frame. But Diane already understood the deeper truth. It wasn't the walkout that made history. It was the moment just before it, when civility fractured live on camera, and the crownless prince revealed more than he ever meant to. What began as a thoughtful exchange ended in a royal implosion no one could have, scripted, leaving even Diana Sawyer momentarily speechless. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next shocking on-air moment might just be one click away.